Hello and welcome everyone to the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance's crypto roundup for Friday, May 31st, 2024. Ron Quaranta here with my amazing co-hosts David Brill and Josh Klayman. June is almost here. Before we begin, our usual disclaimers. Obviously, everyone that's watching on LinkedIn Live and Twitter, thank you so much for joining us. X, not Twitter. Please do keep in mind that nothing discussed is accounting, investment, legal, or tax advice. Any tokens that David or Josh or I talk about are not recommendations, and these are our opinions, obviously, and not the opinions of our respective firms. Josh, David, it's good to see you both. It's been a busy week as usual. I want to dive right in. Josh, I know we've got you for a limited time. The Gulfstream's on the tarmac, and I know how busy you are. David, one of the things I want to kick off with is the macro stuff. So the Fed's preferred inflation index, personal consumption expenditures, PCE, cooled slightly in line with expectations, 0.2%. So it's interesting to see what I call, David, and you and I've chatted about this, the kind of glide path soft landing. And it makes me look at things like the broader markets when we look at equities, which are all down the past week. When we look at crypto, that's down or in a kind of a tight trading range. David, as the economics for this builds, what are you thinking about in this marketplace?
Well, look, I think, small numbers aside or specific data points aside, things are still expensive. Day-to-day individuals are still spending more money than they have in the past, and it's impacting them more. I think if you look on the housing front, you're reading about a lot of people's mortgages resetting, and they're becoming much higher. In addition to the carrying costs, whether it's HOA or otherwise, and then the insurance costs, depending on where they're living, people are being asked to come up with substantially more money, and they're not getting paid substantially more. So whether it be a $7 burger at McDonald's or a double-digit raise in a monthly holding cost for a condominium or a house, the inflation is still there. I think people feel it across the board on income levels, except for yours, Ron. You don't really feel it at the level you're at. But just for the rest of us, people are more cognizant of what's going on, and so I think that's why Biden's been polling on the economy, poorly or in a way he wouldn't have thought. It's because this inflation is there, it's sticky, and people are feeling it.
Yeah. David, to add to that one thing, and Josh, obviously chime in, David and I yammer on about the macroeconomic landscape here. The other interesting stat that I look at, David, is credit card balances, which are now ticking up notably post-pandemic. And it to me, it brings about the idea that you and I have talked about, which is like, look, some of this spending is going to slow down just to cover and service debt. So what does that do, from a risk-on perspective? Why should anyone be risk on? And are current crypto prices reflecting that? Equities and crypto got beat up this week. In this kind of environment, do you foresee it continuing to be risk off?
Well, I tend to look at, the credit card delinquencies as, in my estimation, as the majority of the people are using this to pay for their day-to-day.
Yeah.
Now people are buying, fancy clothes that Josh wears, but more the paying for groceries. You can't get out of the grocery store for $100. Other things that are just pricey, and so if people are using their credit cards for day-to-day living and they're struggling to keep up with their bills, at some point those costs will become delinquent. So I think on the low end, I think you're starting to see the signs, maybe with car leases, defaulting on car leases. You're seeing all those signs that the sort of lower end of the income scale is suffering. And while it may not be hitting the the middle or upper tier income groups, it's certainly something I'm definitely paying attention to. And to answer your question, I don't know if it has an immediate effect, but I think people are very aware of it. I think the only thing that's balancing is the dollar has been going down of late, which is always, pro bullish and pro sort of risk assets. So you have these two interesting dynamics going on.
David, what's the lease like on the Rolls-Royce Flying Spur you got down there?
Ron, my problem with the Rolls is that, they don't park very well. They're very clunky cars and they take up a lot of space. So I think there are other cars that are a little more environmentally friendly than that one. But
They are chunky 12 cylinders. Josh, jump in here. And for everyone in the audience, again, thank you all for joining us. If you're on LinkedIn and X, if you got questions for Josh or David and I, please put them in the chat. We've been giving Josh heat because we know she's got to hop early. And Josh, it's always great to have you part of everything you're doing. Please don't yell at us post show. But, obviously in the context of all of the market stuff, Josh, there's still the legislative stuff that's moving forward. There's still the regulatory stuff that's moving forward. And something that jumped out to me was kind of this ongoing FTX fallout. And I don't know if you want to comment on this, but one of Sam Bankman-Fried's insiders got 7.5 years, which was, I don't want to say it was shocking, but to me, it really is this idea of how much you cooperate in these investigations really changed the dynamics. And if I understand correctly, he really wasn't cooperating. Had you seen that, Josh? And is any of that kind of surprising to you?
So I think it's sending a message, as you just said, right? I think what will be interesting, I don't think, although, certainly as I was explaining to you guys in the green room, it's been busier than can be.
yeah,
But I haven't seen that I recall the sentencing of the people who did cooperate yet.
Yeah.
And so, I guess as we see that, it may be markedly shorter, or we'll see. I guess we'll see about how much cooperation really helps you. I think one other thing that really has been on my mind, just in general, since you mentioned, the political and everything, and that regulatory and legislative developments continue to occur, is this announcement that the SEC had told spot Ethereum ETF applicants to get their first round of
Today.
Form S1s in today. Yeah. And so after the things that we talked about last week in terms of, really a sea change in terms of legislation, and really both the Biden administration and Trump and other potential candidates for president bringing up crypto as a campaign issue, I think, you have to wonder, could that be what's accelerating this, not just the rule change, that was approved, but also these filings. So I think what we've been seeing is that some are predicting that as early as, for example, next month, June, we could have a spot Ether ETF. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there have been some really interesting announcements from some of the big banks about predictions and price. But I leave that stuff to you.
well, if you had listened to our last episode, or if you recall from our last episode, our crystal ball said 4 to 6 weeks for approval, and so I still think we're really right in the middle of that, Josh. But I also will say that I do expect a second round of comments after the first round. So I do think we have another turn coming. But our thesis has been, end of June, maybe right after, maybe Emancipation, July 4th will be Independence Day for Ethereum, with an ETF being approved right after that. So.
It's funny, Josh and David, as you both mentioned this, and I agree with you. We often try not to have the politics conversation, but I heard something really interesting this morning, which was, this election, like past elections, is going to be about the votes at the margin. And what that makes us realize is crypto is part of votes at the margin. And it's these arguments that, well, not a lot of people are focused on crypto. It's really not an election issue. It is, if a percentage point in the general election matters. And it's really interesting to see how this evolves. David, I'd love your perspectives. I know you've been in Austin and obviously attending the Consensus Conference. Let's get to that in a little bit. But I do want to raise one other thing that's kind of in the legislative and regulatory purview. Josh, to the extent you want to comment on it, I think the deadline for SAB 121, the veto by the president, David, Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, is Monday, I believe. I am still going to weigh in on my opinion that maybe the SEC rescinds or withdraws 121. Have either of you heard different, or has your perspective on it changed at all?
I'm not. So my perspective clearly has changed since that first conversation that we had when you were very prescient about maybe it not happening. My view is that the president's just he's not going to veto it, and he's just going to let it sort of, go through without having to take an affirmative action. So I think there, one thing I want to say for our audience is just because the president doesn't veto SAB 121 and we do get an Ethereum ETF, don't take your foot off the pedal. Like, I think these are two things that even in a more normal environment, these are two things that should have been approved. SAB 121, I think the overwhelming majority of people I've talked to rarely have gotten any feedback that, oh, this doesn't make sense, this isn't good for the ecosystem. And I think we all believe in Ethereum ETF as a sort of a fait accompli, and it was just a matter of when and who wanted to kick it down the road for a while or who didn't. So I'm going to be more cautious for our viewers that these are things that should be approved. The SAB 121 rule should be repealed. The Ethereum ETF should be approved. So, like, when we look at it in a broader scope, I don't want people to take a victory lap, because I think these were sort of table stakes that we should have been getting in this election cycle.
Yeah, I mean, so I think I haven't heard any more, but I think just some thoughts in general. One is, I think it is possible, Ron, that the SEC does repeal SAB 121 to avoid causing, the Biden administration to have to choose either way. However, I do think that because, there's the potential for pretty embarrassing situation for the SEC and Gensler. And I understand that it's unrelated, but we just saw those sanctions that came out against the SEC, in excess of $1 million relating to debt box.
Yeah.
And so I think it's possible in my mind that maybe the SEC reintroduces a different version of SAB 121 that perhaps appeases some of its constituents or maybe not constituents, but the people who are providing thoughts, and perhaps a different, more narrowly tailored version is reintroduced to try and save face in some respect. But yeah, your crystal ball has both of you guys, your crystal balls have never failed, and I wish I had followed your crystal balls many years ago.
For everyone in the audience, Josh is not reminding us of the fact that I didn't buy Bitcoin in 2013, which is part of why I'm sitting here. But Josh, no, appreciate that. And one of the other things that's really interesting, and shout out to Adam Goldberg, who with Dina Ellis, they do our policy update. We did one last week. And to that point, Josh, the withdrawal of SAB 21 or the veto of SAB 121, whatever the ultimate outcome ends up being, the kind of sausage making behind the scenes really is part and parcel of the politics. If they withdraw, can they bring it back at some later date in a revised form? And there's a lot that needs to happen for those things to occur. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes. And I suspect I'll be texting you both around 4:55 p.m., where these kind of withdrawals from regulators get published on a Friday afternoon. Hopefully you both have Wi-Fi on the jets. David, Josh, lots again to cover. I do want to talk a little bit also about a couple of other things. And let me go back to the ETF approvals, because David, you mentioned that repeatedly, and the three of us have been speaking about it. I had seen in the news this morning that some other well-known folks were talking about what are the next spot crypto ETFs. Are we looking at Solana? Are we looking at Doge, God forbid? Are we looking at Avalanche? Whatever it may be. And I guess, David, the question becomes, when does the spot crypto ETF train stop? Where does it go from there?
Those are great questions. I think in the first instance, we need to see sort of the ETH go through and be approved on with some of the other tokens, there's, been rumors out there that they've received subpoenas, that there are ongoing investigations into whether those tokens are securities. And so I don't think it's as clear cut as we might hope. So I'm not bullish on the fact that, Solana is next in line, or for instance, XRP, has had a couple of different rulings, but there hasn't been really a final adjudication on the merits. So I don't think we can suddenly expect that those are in line. What you may see is some savvy people wanting to get first in line for when they may be considered to be in line and start drafting a Solana S1, or other tokens, whether it be Ripple or other tokens, and want to be first in the queue for consideration.
Mm.
But I still think that there's a fairly significant mind shift that will need to occur before some of those really start being taken seriously. And then you need to see futures markets for those and things of that nature. So there's a process that needs to take place. And I think while some people may jump the gun on drafting an S1 for them, I still think we're a ways away from them.
Yeah, and to that point, go ahead, Josh. Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, like, and David, to that point, some of the almost joking conversations, like every crypto should have an ETF, or the top 20 cryptos should have an ETF. To your point, A, there's a very sophisticated process behind that, and B, I'd argue outside of the top 4 or 5 biggest use cases, and I'm thinking Bitcoin and Ethereum, David, some of these other tokens would not survive that process. Things like market surveillance agreements, things like enough liquidity, things like a futures market. So, we shouldn't get too far afield in this. Everything should be a crypto ETF. It really depends on that kind of institutional adoption where that might go. Josh, I know we have you for a short period of time. I think only a couple of minutes, if that's correct. But tell us what you're focusing on. I know you're super, super busy, but any thoughts you've got about, what's this next few weeks going to look like for you?
Well, for me, in part, I'm closing deals, right? So that's where my mind is, in part. But I think, my heart, in fact, is probably right now in Austin, where so much of our community is gathered, and where so much is going on. So I've been, to the extent possible, following from afar people's postings on LinkedIn and on X and otherwise, just about certain speeches that have been given, announcements, a lot of which have been made this week.
Yeah.
Just a lot of excitement going on. I think I'm excited also for the event, the WSBA event.
That's
So I'm sure you'll talk about that. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm just thrilled that business is booming. I am going to be on the lookout, though. I will say this: in following the passage, at least in the House, of Fit 21. Sorry, I'm getting SAB 121 and Fit 21. I think we've seen a lot of commentary from people in the industry, and we heard this from Lewis as well on last week's show, just about really thinking through some of the provisions in it. And I think I'm looking to, obviously, I've read the proposed legislation, but really thinking through some of the commentary that's been given. And I do think also, just one thing about the other crypto potential spot ETFs someday, I think it is tougher to the extent that the SEC is actively taking the position that certain of the tokens were sold pursuant to securities transactions, right? So that certainly may cause a wrinkle. But I do think if and when we have legislation such as Fit 21, if that's the one that goes through, or another, then at least we will have some kind of, dare I say, clarity about which tokens and which token transactions are outside of the SEC's alleged jurisdiction. And that may help the process of moving towards other crypto spot ETFs.
Josh, thanks so much. And again, you mentioned consensus. David, we'll get your perspective as your feet on the ground there. But we've got a coterie of WSBA members congregating in the lobby of one of the ritzy hotels. Shout out to BB and Greg and Vicky and Kirsten and a whole bunch of others that are gathered there. If you're watching, I hope you're all having a great time and enjoying the conference. Josh, thank you so much. I know you've got to hop.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Have a great day and a great week.
You got it. We'll see you next week.
Catch up, Josh.
David, while you and I still have a little bit of time, I kind of want to go back to the macro stuff that's always really front and center of a lot of the conversations that you and I have. I heard an interesting series of conversations, particularly around public companies holding Bitcoin. I think it was Semler Scientific that publicly announced and put in an SEC filing they'll be holding Bitcoin in their treasury, and I know they will mark up as appropriate. But is this that first brick out of the dam of corporates that would be holding things like Bitcoin?
I mean, look, we have a couple who hold it for whether they're ETFs and you're holding it as part of the ETF. Look, I think it's interesting. I think diversifying the capital you're holding on your balance sheet is an interesting way, potentially to juice those returns. I think it's a wait and see. I mean, look, it's worked for MicroStrategy. It's worked for El Salvador.
Yep.
They have boards. If their boards are approving them, then, it's a perfectly, reasonable approach. I don't know if I feel strongly about it. I think it's a nice bullish indicator for the belief in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But I think everybody's company's treasuries run differently, and so I wonder, I wonder how that all sort of plays out. Like corporate treasurers are in their own little interesting bubble, so to speak. So
a not easy bubble, no less. I feel
yes,
for corporate
and
treasurers.
so I feel that there must be specific reasons they're doing it, but we support it as an ecosystem.
No, agreed. The other aspect I look at, David, and you and I use the phrase wirehouse a lot, and we've been waiting for when will the wirehouses, when will Morgan Stanley, I think it was a rumor a couple of weeks ago that Morgan Stanley will open up spot Bitcoin ETF to their brokerage platform and brokerage customers. I want to push back a little bit on that, and I'd love your thesis on this. When we look at, we talked about risk off a bit earlier on. The market kind of took a walloping this week, sort of across the board. But when you map the macros of this to like the short-term yield of the short-term treasuries, for example, the front-ended treasury yield curve is 4.3% or so, essentially risk-free. Why wouldn't corporates or investors look at, the front end of the yield curve for yield versus a risk-on asset? Is it not going to change significantly until the yield curve inverts the right way?
It's really interesting. I think, you have an approved product. You could certainly be allowing your customers who ask for the product on a non-solicited basis to purchase the product. We're almost, 5 to 6 months out. From my perspective, I don't really see a great reason why they're being so deliberate about it. I think also perhaps once the ETH ETF is approved, that maybe they'll, let the reins loose a little bit at that point. They're always worried about, some claims that, they didn't have the fiduciary. They weren't being a good fiduciary by allowing these to be purchased by their customers.
Sure.
I just feel at this point, you've had one of the fastest growing ETFs ever. I think IBIT's got to 20 billion, the fastest. And I think they're just, I want to say it in a nice way, Ron. I just think that they're being very laissez-faire about it and that people will want it. And I think that, they should be serving their customers. And I'm in no way saying that they need to take the risk of prospectively offering it to customers and saying, hey, we think you should have X% of your portfolio. But if you get a call on an unsolicited basis from somebody saying, hey, I want to buy 500 shares of IBIT or 500 shares of another Bitcoin ETF, I think at this point, people should be allowed to. You can buy it on the online trading platforms. Why now the wirehouses,
we've seen this.
They've had enough.
But we've seen this before, though, right? We've seen sort of some of the larger houses that kind of make this almost philosophic distinction about whether or not they should make things available to their customers. I think Vanguard publicly said they're not going to offer it to their clients on an unsolicited basis. It reminds me of the meme stocks back in 2021, where you and I watched as really large brokerage platforms said, no, we're not making these available to our customers. Whether or not you or I agree with that, they seem to have this perspective of we're going to operate in that best interest of our customers and maybe winning them over to the fact that crypto ETFs might be in the best interest of their customers is still an uphill battle.
Well, and with the meme stocks, you have to wonder if they was in the best interest of their prime brokerage customers.
Fair point.
So, and I have no issue with the big banks. I just more along the lines of you have approved products. People want to buy these products. And we're not saying to people like, okay, you need to be offering them and, soliciting them. But if you have somebody who wants to buy a product that's regulated in our space, they should be allowed to do it. And I think they're doing a disservice to their customers.
I think you and I philosophically agree on that, my friend. So you are in Austin, David.
Yes.
One I did not get the opportunity this year to go. Shout out to the Consensus team in CoinDesk. They always do a pretty big event. One of the barometers we all have seen in the past 7, 8, 9 years has been what is attendance like at these particular conferences? What's the tone of the conversation? So, David, to the extent you're comfortable talking about it, how has the conference been? What are you seeing in the conversations?
Well, look, I'm seeing a lot of energy. There's definitely people who are upbeat. There's been a lot of events, which is sort of bullish in the sense that people are feeling comfortable enough to throw events. And, last night, for instance, I had the good fortune of going to the A16Z event, and they gave me he had talked about his book, but they gave me a copy of Chris Dixon's book, which I'm appreciative. And I will read it in some of my flying since I'm doing a ton of flying next few weeks. Paul Hastings hosted an event, and Sidley hosted an event and Cahill hosted an event amongst a lot of law firms and other companies. So I think there is a view that they wanted to be here, they want to talk to their clients, and there's sort of a bullish mood. So I would say that, and then there's some interesting projects on the floor that I've been looking at. Different wallet applications. MasterCard is offering a wallet application where you can use their wallet and go through the whole ecosystem using their crypto wallet. And I've been gotten a chance to sort of see it in person, but my colleagues have seen it. So last thing I'll say, there've been some good speeches. R.F. Kennedy spoke. Like my colleague Jeremy Sheridan spoke on security issues and preventing sort of pig butchering and some of those other things. And Ari Redbon was there. So I think there's really like a wealth of good information, and just the learnings you get walking through a conference floor hall, and just listening to different audiences. So I think it's been good. I think people have been really positive and very hopeful.
A different kind of feel than Lambros with Lamborghinis parked out of the front as it was. I think what was it, 2020 or 2019, right, David?
Well, I did see a DeLorean, but I think the Lambos. I think that's sort of going to be replaced by some other car at some point. Maybe the Lambo SUVs will be the more practical, car for the Gen Xers and Boomers or something.
Oh Lord, Lambo SUVs. Who would have thought?
You know what, Ron? I was not familiar with the Lambo SUV, but in my neighborhood in Fort Lauderdale, I think every fifth car is a Lambo SUV. And I literally, the first time I saw one, I was like, that kind of looks like a Lambo SUV. And I was like, it's like, really? Would that many people really want that? And sure enough.
And every time I see them, they're in like bright orange or bright yellow, and I'm not sure the appeal. I'm sorry.
Yeah, everyone has their own taste, but for what it's worth, they do ride pretty well. But I think I'd rather have a different car for an SUV.
Nice. David, the one other thing I wanted to ask you, and I'm not sure it got raised at the event in Austin, but one of the things we haven't spoken about in a little bit has been Web3 and gaming and kind of the impact on crypto. Are you tracking anything in that space? I've started to really dive into it just based on the conversations that you and I have had, and it's a really complicated field. But have you had any thoughts about it recently?
Well, there are a couple of token projects that I follow that are bringing real world games to market. And I think that the gaming area is one where people are willing to put money into both investing, buying tokens, and things of that nature. So I still consider that, kind of moving forward. I haven't, I'm not a gamer, I'm not sort of as familiar with each individual game, but I do think that's an area that's going to do very well this year as more adoption takes place.
Interesting.
And also, one thing we can talk about too is that the 3 AI projects that are merging.
Please. Let's talk about it.
I don't have all of my notes in front of me on that because they're back in New York, but Singularity AI and 2 other AI projects are merging really to create a more robust, AI offering with these tokens, and then, potentially looking at partnering with other AI tokens. So I think you're seeing, a sort of unconventional roll up here. I don't know if the technologies are all adjacent to each other or not. It's something we'd have to look into. But I think you're seeing, smart people in the ecosystem look and see the landscape and see whom they might be able to partner with to get scale and to get competitive advantage.
David, it's, as you raise that, and I'd seen the AI articles as well. You and I have been in the space long enough to remember. Do you remember when we talk about tokens and blockchain kind of fading into the background because of IoT? IoT will be the force multiplier because it'll be behind everything, and everything will be paid for by tokens, and it'll use blockchain technology. I wonder if that thesis was incorrect, and it's actually AI that's the tangential technology that moves some of this forward. And when you look at things like the announcement recently that Apple's Siri will kind of get an AI brain boost going forward. Do you think AI really is the force multiplier that makes crypto or tokens a part of everyday life?
I do. I do. I mean, I think there's so much you can do with it. And I think more than the Internet of Things, AI is not it's computing power. It's
Yeah.
the use of data. I mean, if you think about it, if you had a front end, an AI front end, and a blockchain back end, and you were trying to do research and things like that, and then that the queries that the AI would be hitting, sources of proof.
Right.
Like I could see, for instance, obviously the medical field is challenging, but if you wanted to do research on, different initiatives, medical trials, clinical trials, you could have all this anonymized data, from individuals sitting in the blockchain and then the AI hitting it in sort of different formulations and different questions it's asking.
Yep.
And I think it's a very powerful use case that I hope, our scientists are using or contemplating on using, because I think it would add a lot of value to the ecosystem.
I think all of it is so complicated. I agree with you, David, but I think all of it's so complicated that this is a multi-generational evolution away from how we used to do what we do, and it will leverage AI, and it will leverage blockchain, and it will leverage tokenization in some way. David, it's always great. You and I can have these kind of wide-ranging conversations. For everyone in the audience who joined us, thank you so much. If you've got questions for David or I, please put them in the chat or email us at info@wsba.co. David, I want to end off with, and I know you're busy traveling, so I appreciate you taking the time. What's the trading range for us? Let's go back to you and I looking at our technical charts.
Sure.
What are your thoughts?
Well, for Bitcoin, we're still stuck in the sort of 60 to 72 range.
Yep.
I think if we were to get past 72,000, there's a lot of liquidations. There's a big sell wall at 72,000. We could potentially have a lot of liquidations that would take us maybe up to 78 or 80.
Mm-hmm.
I think Ether's been holding really strong. We had this run up with the ETFs, and it looks like we're going to get an ETF approved. The S1s are being reviewed now. And if you look at Bitcoin ran up fairly significantly before the ETFs were approved. So one of the things we'll want to see is, are people buying a lot of ETHE, the Grayscale product? Are people buying, have people gotten more comfortable, using the crypto exchanges, and are they buying Ethereum ahead of this?
Yep.
So, is this going to be, run up to it and a nice run, and then sort of when the news comes out, it kind of quiets down? I think that's one other thing. The last thing I would say is your favorite coins, Ron, are something interesting to watch. Ron, I did look for a T-shirt for you here with
Lord.
one that had maybe Doge and a few of the other meme coins on it. And I still think one day an envelope will show up for you with one of those. But I'm very interested to see how those perform. We've seen those meme coins perform well when Bitcoins perform well.
Yep.
And so as we're in this choppy state for Bitcoin, are some of the meme coins going to, move forward and start, not going parabolic, but really start to move, or are they going to sort of trade in tandem with Bitcoin?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's something interesting. The last thing I'll say is I still think Bitcoin's in a consolidating phase in the 60 to 70 range.
Mm-hmm.
And so until there's a catalyst, I see that going on for a while.
David, are we over the Mt. Gox liquidations out of the Mt. Gox bankruptcy, or is there still treasury inventory that needs to be sold off? I don't recall.
Well, look, in the first instance, whenever there's old tokens that come back into the ecosystem, people sort of get a little fearful and are like, oh, everything's going to get sold and the sky is falling a little bit. And so, we saw some sell-off from that. Yeah. Look, I think you have to look at people who have not had the access to their money for so long. Some of them are going to want all the liquidity. Some of them are going to say, hey, you know what? I got really lucky here. Didn't feel good at the time, but I'm going to sell half of it and let the rest roll. And, some might just be, diamond hands and just hold them.
Yeah.
So I do think we'll see more liquidity. I do think that it did affect the price in the short term, and we'll get a good sense pretty quickly if people are selling.
David, as always, my friend, we've got to leave it there. Always appreciate your opinion. Thank you for everyone in the audience who joined us. Again, if you've got questions for David or I or Josh, info@wsba.co. Also, shameless plug, David, as Josh mentioned before she had to head out, on June 5th, we're doing our open public webinar. So you want to be a special purpose broker dealer. Josh will be part of that. If you're interested, find us on LinkedIn. You should be able to get the registration details, or again, info@wsba.co. David, I know the executive airport is waiting for you, old friend, so safe travels. We'll leave it there. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.